This is OwlUp, where learning happens in minutes, not hours. For a deeper journey, explore all our courses at owlup.co. Now, let's dive in. Welcome back to Chapter 2 of our series, The Cold War Space Race, Battleground Beyond Earth. In this episode titled The First Man, Yuri Gagarin's Historic Flight, we'll explore the incredible mission parameters that launched Gagarin into history as the first human in space. So, buckle up and let's dive in. A human heart, beating over 100 miles above Earth. A metal sphere barely bigger than a closet. A launch no one outside the Soviet Union knew was happening. In this episode, we drop into the tense, silent moments just before the first man bets his life on a new frontier. No champagne countdown. No global broadcast. Just a code name, Kedar, Siberian cedar, and a young pilot strapped into a sealed sphere, listening to engineers argue over his fate through the radio hiss. Outside, the world went to work and to school, unaware that its history was about to tilt. Gagarin's view wasn't the sweeping, cinematic Earth we're used to seeing from the ISS. His window was small, his seat fixed, his job mostly to stay alive and stay calm. Control of the spacecraft remained firmly on the ground. His manual override codes were literally sealed in an envelope in case radio contact failed. Humanity's first step into orbit was less like a confident first stride and more like taking a deep breath before diving into a lake whose depth no one had measured yet. The spacecraft carrying him, Vostok 1, was essentially two cramped worlds bolted together, a spherical descent module for Gagarin and a service module packed with life support, orientation jets, and electronics. Outside, its thin metal skin faced extremes his training could only hint at. Sunlight hot enough to bake one side, shadow cold enough to freeze the other. Inside, the air was thick and still, more like a sealed hospital room than a cockpit. Gagarin was not flying this machine so much as riding it, a test subject with a headset and a call sign. Yet every sensor around him was hunting for the same answer. Could a human body and mind stay functional off the planet for more than a few minutes? For Soviet engineers, the biggest unknown wasn't just whether the machinery would function, it was whether the person inside would. American tests with chimpanzees had hinted that living creatures could handle weightlessness for a while. But there was a real fear that a trained pilot might become disoriented, even lose the ability to think clearly once freed from the constant pull of gravity. So Gagarin's jobless flight was, in reality, packed with quiet tasks: reading instruments, speaking clearly for the medical team, making simple movements on command to test coordination. His calm voice on the loop was as important as any pressure gauge. Outside his tiny world, the trajectory had been designed with equal parts mathematics and paranoia. If the engines failed at launch, the rocket would separate and parachutes would bring him down inside Soviet borders. If the automated systems misfired in orbit, the craft's shape and atmospheric drag were chosen so it would eventually fall back on its own, like a carefully thrown stone that's guaranteed to return. Even success had safety nets layered beneath it. Yet the mission was far from flawless. A higher-than-planned orbit meant that, had the retro rocket not fired, Gagarin might have circled Earth for days as oxygen and power dwindled. During re-entry, a cable bundle failed to separate cleanly between the two modules, leaving them twisting together until aerodynamic forces finally tore them apart. Inside, the G-loads climbed toward levels that could blur vision and crush breathing, turning his body into an unwilling stress test for human endurance. Then came the part the world didn't learn immediately. He didn't ride Vostok all the way down. At about 7 kilometers up, Gagarin ejected and descended by parachute, landing separately from the capsule. That detail mattered because official first-in-space rules expected astronauts to land with their vehicles. The Soviet narrative simply presented him stepping onto the grass as if he'd ridden the metal sphere from launch pad to touchdown. The impact rippled far beyond that field. In Washington, the flight detonated political anxiety. If the Soviets could loft a human, they could refine the same rockets for warheads. In classrooms and laboratories across the United States, it translated into budgets, scholarships, and a crash program that would, less than a decade later, plant American footprints on the moon, a response to a mission that had lasted barely 108 minutes. Gagarin's 108 minutes reshaped everyday life in ways that weren't obvious from that quiet landing in a Soviet field. School curricula shifted almost overnight. More math, more physics, more emphasis on languages so engineers could read foreign journals. In the US, the newly formed NASA suddenly had political backing to think in decades, not election cycles, and astronaut went from obscure term to childhood ambition. Factories that once stamped out aircraft parts retooled for precision rocketry, demanding cleaner assembly lines, tighter tolerances, and new alloys. Even medicine absorbed lessons. If doctors could monitor a cosmonaut through launch and re-entry, why not adapt similar telemetry to heart patients on Earth? Reaching orbit is like a symphony's first full chord after a long, tense silence. Technically just one moment in time, but it forces everyone in the hall to listen differently from then on. Gagarin's flight was that chord for the Cold War. Gagarin's leap now shapes how we frame risk and reward beyond Earth. Training pipelines, from Star City to Houston to Bengaluru, still echo the medical and psychological screens pioneered for that first orbital slot. Every new crewed capsule must answer an unwritten question. What story will this flight tell about the nation behind it? As more flags and private logos reach orbit, the first human in space becomes less a trophy than a shared starting line for negotiating who belongs out there and on what terms. Gagarin never flew in space again. His reward was to become a living monument, grounded by a state afraid to risk its new symbol. Yet his short arc still echoes in how launch anniversaries feel like shared birthdays for a spacefaring species. The next first may belong to a private crew or another nation, but they'll launch through the wake his orbit left behind. To go deeper, here are 3 next steps. 1. Watch the restored footage of Vostok 1 and Gagarin's launch sequence on the official Roscosmos YouTube channel, pausing to compare what you see with the podcast's description of the capsule's cramped interior and manual controls. 2. Read a chapter from Stephen Walker's book, Beyond, the astonishing story of the first human to leave our planet and journey into space. Then pull up the original NASA-translated transcripts of Gagarin's communications, available via NASA's History Archive, to see how his real words match the dramatization. 3. Open Google Earth's Voyager Space Collection and virtually trace Gagarin's orbital path over Earth. Then visit the online exhibits at the Yuri Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center Museum website to connect that flight path to the actual training environment that prepared him for it. This was OwlUp, your daily step forward. To keep learning with structured courses and more insights, go to owlup.co. Until tomorrow!